Friday. The place was nearly empty except for the front desk clerk and two officers talking near the vending machines. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, the kind of place that forgot people once they left. But James hadn't come here to be seen. He came to file a noise complaint. That's all. His wife, Martha, stood beside him, clutching her tote bag tight against her side. She wore a knit sweater. Her hands shook slightly. She didn't say much these days, just smiled faintly and followed James wherever he went. Alzheimer's was like that. A slow, cruel erasure. "Sir, I told you already," the officer at the desk snapped, barely looking up. "If it's about that construction noise again, we don't handle it here. Go home." James opened his mouth to speak, slowly, politely. "It's not, sir, my wife hasn't been sleeping, and—" "Oh my God," the clerk groaned, waving at the uniformed deputy nearby. "Can someone escort this guy out? He's wasting our time." The veteran took a quiet step back. His hand gently reached out to guide Martha behind him. She was trembling now, confused. The commotion unsettled her. A SWAT officer, decked out in black body armor, suddenly approached. "Too fast. I'm going to need you to leave, old man. You're disturbing the peace," the officer barked. James hesitated. "We just want some help. My wife." Then it happened. Martha took one step forward, eyes wide, clutching James's jacket. And in one reckless instant, the officer drew his taser and fired. The sound cracked through the lobby. Martha crumpled. James froze. No one moved. 1 second passed. Then 2. And then James slowly turned toward the officer, face blank, voice low. He said 5 words, and the entire room fell silent. His name was James Holloway, Sergeant, United States Army, retired, 3 tours, 2 Purple Hearts, 1 Silver Star. He never talked about the medals. They sat in a box in the garage, covered in dust, next to a folded flag and an old faded photo of his unit standing in front of a Humvee in Kandahar. But back then, he was called The Wall. Not because he was big, because no one could break him. Not under fire, not under pressure, not when the mission fell apart and his unit was pinned down by enemy mortar fire for 11 hours. He stayed calm. He carried one of his men, Private Castillo, on his back through a burning field, both legs bleeding, and refused to be airlifted out until every last soldier was safe. Generals shook his hand. Presidents wrote him letters. Entire bases knew his name. But glory fades. And now he was just an old man who limped when it rained and took care of a woman who no longer remembered their wedding song. Martha used to be a schoolteacher, brilliant, gentle, the kind of woman who wrote handwritten thank you cards to her students' parents. Alzheimer's came like a slow thief. At first it was names, then places, then time itself. Now some days she didn't know who James was, but she'd still reach for his hand, and he'd always let her. They had one granddaughter, Lena, a college sophomore studying medicine in Chicago. Every Sunday she'd call, even if just for 5 minutes. James lived for those 5 minutes, and in his wallet, behind his VA ID, was a photo of David, their only son. Marine Corps, lost to an IED in Fallujah. James never spoke of him aloud. Once he was applauded by generals. Now he was insulted by a desk clerk who thought he talked too slow. Life had reduced his world to short errands and long silences. But the dignity, that, he never let go. The moment the taser hit Martha, it was as if time stopped. But only for James. The lobby didn't react like it should have. No screams, no rushing to help, just a stunned silence, followed by that familiar sound. The scuff of boots, the static of radios, the low murmurs of people who were already trying to justify what had just happened. James dropped to his knees beside his wife. Her eyes were shut tight, her mouth trembling. He cupped her cheek with a trembling hand, whispering, "It's okay, baby. I'm here. I'm right here." The SWAT officer didn't flinch. His weapon still pointed toward the ground, wires dangling, face blank like he'd just taken out trash, not a human being. "Should have complied," the officer muttered under his breath, loud enough to be heard. James slowly turned his face up, but didn't speak. He just looked, not in rage, not in fear, just disbelief. The desk clerk leaned forward. "Sir, we're calling paramedics, but you need to stay back while we handle this." Handle this? A deputy, young, maybe early 30s, stepped forward. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from her. We'll take it from here." James's hands hovered in the air. He didn't want to let go. "Please," he said softly. "She's scared of strangers. Let me talk to her till they get here." The deputy didn't even look him in the eye. "That's not protocol." People in the waiting area watched, but no one moved. One woman took out her phone. Another shook her head and turned away. No one stood up. James glanced around the room, confused. Hurt. What are we doing? What have we become? He rose slowly, his knees aching, back stiff, and stepped aside. One of the officers pulled out a yellow blanket and threw it over Martha, as if covering up the moment itself, as if her presence was the problem. "I just wanted some help for the noise behind our apartment," James said to no one in particular. "It's been keeping her up at night. That's all." The SWAT officer scoffed. "Maybe next time don't bring a mental patient into a government building." James's chest tightened. He looked down at his service boots, worn but polished, a habit he never broke. His hand trembled at his side, not with anger, with restraint. They didn't know who she was. They didn't know who he was. And maybe they didn't care. But the silence inside him was louder than any insult in that room. He sat down quietly on the cold bench near the exit. A janitor passed by, pushing a mop bucket. James stared at the floor. Outside, thunder rolled overhead. Inside, he just kept repeating her name softly as paramedics wheeled her away. "Martha, Martha, I'm here." The rain had thickened by the time James stepped outside. The paramedics had taken Martha. No one told him where, just that he'd be contacted, not escorted, not comforted, just dismissed. He stood beneath the courthouse overhang for a while, letting the mist cling to his sleeves. His shoes were soaked. He didn't care. Then, slowly, he sat down on the edge of the concrete steps, knees stiff, breath shaky. From his pocket, he pulled out his old leather wallet, cracked at the corners, held together by muscle memory. Inside it, behind the Medicare card and the pharmacy receipt, was the photo, black and white, curled edges, 6 men in uniform, dust on their faces, a handwritten note on the back. "Kandahar, 2007, brothers, always." James stared at it. His thumb grazed the face of one of the soldiers, Castillo, the one he'd carried through mortar fire. He remembered how Castillo's hand had clung to his vest, whispering, "Don't let me die here, Sarge." James didn't. He never would. But now, here he was, an old man in the rain, his wife in a stretcher, his dignity stripped inside a building he once thought represented justice. He looked out at the empty parking lot. No flags, no music, no salute, just silence. And then he closed his eyes and sighed. From across the parking lot, a man in a black hoodie had been standing by the bus stop, motionless, holding a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. He'd seen everything. From the moment the SWAT team approached to the flash of the taser. He didn't film it. He didn't speak. He just watched. Now, as James sat hunched over on the concrete step, the man finally moved. He walked slowly toward the courthouse doors, but paused beside James. His voice was quiet, deep. "Sergeant Holloway?" James looked up, startled. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" The man nodded. "Not really. But you saved my uncle in Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Omar T. Lewis, 3rd Battalion, 2010. You pulled him out of a wrecked convoy. He told us about you every Thanksgiving." James blinked. The name hit him like a soft echo. "He's the reason I joined up," the man added, pulling out a badge, not a police badge, but one from a military liaison unit. "I'm off duty," he said, "but I saw what happened, and that's not going to sit right." Without another word, the man pulled out his phone and began texting. He didn't say who he was contacting. He didn't need to, but something had been set in motion. And for the first time in hours, James looked up at the sky, and it felt a little less heavy. The rain hadn't let up when James was called back into the courthouse. He walked in slowly, unsure why he'd been summoned. No one had explained, just that someone very senior wanted to speak with him. His boots squeaked faintly on the marble floor as he stepped through the lobby, the same place where, just an hour ago, his wife had been tased in front of him. The same officers were there, the same clerk behind the desk. But now, something felt different. Stillness. Then the main entrance swung open. 3 men in full dress uniform entered, dark coats, golden trim, medals glinting against the stormlight. Behind them, 2 more in civilian suits. One of them held a leather folder. The other? He wore the insignia of a lieutenant general. The young man from the bus stop, now in uniform, followed closely behind, nodding respectfully toward James. Everyone turned. The clerk stood frozen, eyes wide. The SWAT officer who had fired the taser stiffened like he'd been caught stealing. "Which one is Sergeant First Class James Holloway?" the general asked aloud, scanning the room. James hesitated, unsure. I'm James," he said quietly. The general stepped forward, removed his hat, and saluted, a crisp, perfect motion. "Sergeant Holloway," he said, "we've been briefed. What happened here was a disgrace to your wife, to your service, to everything that uniform represents." James stood in stunned silence. The general turned to the others. "This man served 3 tours, saved lives, was wounded twice, and today he was treated like a criminal in a building meant to serve the people he fought for." He turned to the SWAT officer. "What's your name, son?" The man swallowed. "Officer Maddox, sir. You tased a woman with documented PTSD, didn't verify her condition, and ignored protocol for de-escalation. You will turn in your weapon and badge, effective immediately." Maddox opened his mouth to protest, but the general raised a hand. "No explanations, no excuses. You will leave the building now." 2 MPs stepped forward. Maddox backed away slowly, humiliated. The clerk behind the counter tried to speak, but the man in the suit holding the folder stepped up. "I'm Deputy Secretary Nolan from the Department of Veterans Affairs," he said. "You shredded Mrs. Holloway's medical papers when she asked for help and refused to call for assistance. We're opening a formal inquiry into your conduct and the department's failure to support our veterans." The clerk's hands trembled. She said nothing. Then the young soldier, the one who had recognized James, stepped forward, holding a velvet case. "Sir," he said, voice steady, "on behalf of the 3rd Battalion, and in honor of your service and sacrifice, we'd like to present this." He opened the case. A medal, polished and gleaming. Not a government-issued one. This was different. It was custom, engraved. "For quiet valor." James stared at it, overwhelmed. The general continued. "We've arranged full medical coverage for your wife with a specialist in trauma care. She's already en route to a veteran-approved facility, and you'll be flown to her within the hour." James shook his head slowly. Why all this?" The general's face softened. "Because people forget, Sergeant. They forget that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they just sit quietly, holding their wife's hand, trying to get through another day." The crowd in the lobby had gathered now. Phones were lowered, hands were folded, no one said a word, and then a single slow clap from the janitor, then another, until the lobby echoed with applause. Not thunderous, not performative, just honest. James stood still, tears welling in his eyes, but he never cried. He simply nodded once and whispered, "Thank you." Later that evening, as the storm broke and the skies began to clear, James stood quietly at the edge of the hospital bed where Martha lay. She was resting, breathing calmly, IV gently dripping beside her. He didn't say much, just held her hand, tracing the lines of her weathered fingers like he had 1,000 times before. Across the room, a nurse discreetly checked the monitors and gave James a kind smile before stepping out. On the nightstand was the velvet case, still open, the metal inside catching the soft light. James looked at it for a long time, then closed the lid. When the nurse returned a short while later to let him know the transport was ready, James stood, adjusted his jacket, and took one last look around the room. No spotlight, no fanfare, just calm. He exited the hospital, walking past the glass lobby doors with quiet steadiness, the same way he walked through firefights and empty streets in a country most people couldn't point to on a map. A reporter outside tried to stop him. "Sir, just one comment?" James paused, thought for a moment, then said with a soft, steady voice, "The world's loud enough. Dignity whispers." And with that, he kept walking. Across town, Officer Maddox sat alone on a courthouse bench, uniform gone, badge gone, replaying every moment in his mind. He looked down at his hands, once so sure, now trembling. He wasn't arrested, he wasn't shouted at, but that man's silence, that hurt more than any punishment ever could. And somewhere in the distance, under a silver sky, an old soldier walked on, with his head held high, not for the medal, not for the applause, but for the woman he loved, and the peace he finally earned. In a world racing to shout over itself, we often overlook the quiet ones, the ones who stood tall long before the cameras rolled, who bore scars not for glory, but for duty. James Holloway never asked for praise. He never wanted headlines, All he ever wanted was for the woman he loved to be treated with kindness. And yet, in the face of injustice, he showed the kind of strength that metals can't measure, the kind of courage that doesn't roar. It endures. His story isn't just about what went wrong, it's about what can go right. When one person chooses dignity over rage, when another chooses to step up instead of stand by. Because respect shouldn't be earned again and again. It should be remembered, upheld, defended. So the next time you see someone wearing that quiet pride on their sleeve or in their eyes, remember James, and remember this: the strongest hearts don't need to shout. They just keep beating, long after the battle is done. Subscribe if you believe respect should never be optional.